All right, so I'm here with Rabbi Leo Rappaport of Chicago, and we're gonna. What follows is we're gonna have a conversation here about Inyanim Nagea to Pesach. Pesach is around the corner, coming very soon. One of the topics we've discussed together in the past, and we'll discuss and cover today, is the topic of mechiras chametz. The headline I'm envisioning right now for this discussion may be a little too harsh, but at least as clickbait, is mechiras chametz a scam? Right? That sounds pretty harsh. It's not an anti-mechiras chametz discussion, but it is meant to question, to examine the concept and the concepts, to go back to the sources, to, as they say in Yiddish, arum reden. We'll cover different angles and points relating to the history and the practice of mechiras chametz, and hopefully we'll have an interesting discussion. Thank you, Rabbi Rappaport.
Yeah, definitely. I've noticed in some shiurim that I've given recently that your average American Jew has a hard time wrapping his head around the fact that once upon a time people didn't do this and they actually got rid of chametz. So it's important to sort of go back to the beginning and see how it came to be and what it is exactly that we're trying to accomplish.
Right. So, for example, one source that I actually came across this week is the Maharil. Maharil, of course, is a very Chasheva Ashkenazi source, late Rishonim in Ashkenaz, but very important, very influential. And the Sefer Minhagim Maharil was written by a Talmud of his. As recent research has shown, the Talmud actually kept writing it and rewriting it, many drafts, and that's why there's minor variations between different kisvei yad, but it's all the same work from the same author. And this work comes to Hilchos Pesach, so he includes different drashas that Maharil actually gave Pesach time. As we know, Shabbos HaGadol originally, historically, was supposed to be time for speaking about the basic halachas of Pesach. The Maharil himself alludes to the fact that once upon a time they had certain piyutim. I mean, I guess some people still say them, but even those who say them aren't necessarily paying close attention and deriving their halachic knowledge from them. But at some early point, at an original point, the piyutim themselves were composed to contain an overview of Hilchos Pesach in a practical manner for the people of those times. And I think maybe Maharil himself alludes to the fact that, first they made the piyut, and then they were pirushim on the piyut, and then ultimately the Rishonim and Ashkenaz were giving their own drashas in the place of that for Shabbos HaGadol. And then, of course, the Shabbos HaGadol drasha continued evolving from there, and the Alter Rebbe, many Talmidim, even very young Talmidim in yeshiva, you start beginning, at least I don't know how far you get into Hilchos Pesach, but at least you get through the first siman. So the Alter Rebbe talks about the history and the past, the present, the future, the fact that our svarim and printing press being invented surely is an important part of that. But that's all a Maimar HaMusker. So the Maharil. So we find that I think the Reb Chaim or Zerua has, I believe has drashas for Shabbos HaGadol halachos that he spoke about and emphasized, and other Rishonim and Ashkenaz as well, that these drashas are actually preserved in these halachic works or works of halacha and minig. So in Maharil's drasha, Maharil was speaking about particular kalim in the house that are very chametzik. Now, because we have to put ourselves in the shoes of the people at that time. They didn't have silver foil. They didn't have a lot of other things. Some things were similar and some things were different. And really, to understand any aspect of halacha, any aspect of Hilchos Pesach, it is somewhat important to be able to put yourself in the scene and picture what life was like. For example, one point that I've mentioned to you before, and I'll use it as an illustration. The halachas of Hagala, as we all know, the halachas of Hagala do not appear in Shulchan Aruch or in Tur in Yoreh Deah, but rather in Eir Chaim in Hilchos Pesach. It's an integral part of Hilchos Pesach, and the reason for that is that people do not apparently back then typically have chametz Pesach kelim. So they needed to kasher all their kalim for Pesach. So that was a very major central part of how Pesach was experienced, that we got to go kasher all the kalim. And you still see, there's still a ration of that today. If you have teifa forks from the past year, so you stick it on the shelf and you wait till Erev Pesach or the days before Pesach, and that's the one time a year you kasher stuff. So the idea is still out there.
Communal kashering things before Pesach.
Some communities in Bar Park, I don't think I ever went and witnessed and participated, but Bar Park, they still certainly advertise that there are communal kashering centers. They have huge pots for the purpose of kashering. But how many kalim are people actually kashering from chametz to Pesach dik? Not that many. I know, speaking for myself, in my home, at least maybe there's an Indian. Maybe there's an Indian to keep it going, but we take a kasher the bechers. I don't have Pesach dik bechers, so we kasher the bechers for Pesach. So I guess we keep the tradition going that way. Others likely have Pesach dik bechers as well. Now the latest frontier is that Pesach dik sidurim. Sidurim for Pesach that are not the sidurim for Nagan Yar.
The latest frontier is to have a Pesach dik funnel to pour the Kesher Elio back into the bottle.
Pshita, that's not. I mean, to me that's pashat. We didn't use funnels the rest of the year, so the only funnel we had and used was for the Kesher Elio. There's no other use case for a funnel that I can think of.
It recently occurred to me, talking of funnels, a minhag that's mentioned in Paskim and Shulchan Aruch that I haven't seen done by Ifan Klali, and that is based to leave the wine from Kiddush for Friday night, to use the same wine left over for Kiddush by day, but the Ikr is for Havdalah. And the reason is because in the Goinim it says that you're supposed to put the wine of Kiddush on Friday night on your eyes. That it's a shaila of refuah on Shabbos, so you keep it for Matzah Shabbos and you do it then. So our minute to put the wine of Havdalah on the eyes comes from then. Now it's brought to Shulchan Aruch, Alter Rebbe brings it. Again, I haven't seen it done in anywhere, certainly not in Lubavitch, but it occurred to me that when the Rebbe used to come into the Fabrengens, the Rebbe always or often would pull out of his pocket a little bottle which had wine from, I don't know where that wine was from, if it was from previous Fabrengens or from Kiddush or from other places. And the Rebbe would include that in the wine that he used at that given Fabrengen. So it occurred to me that this idea of keeping wine and using it for the next time is something that the Rebbe did incorporate in his anhagas. And so maybe there is room to use your funnel every Friday night to pour some wine back into the bottle.
Interesting. Got to look into that. Right. So, okay, you found a use case. I retract what I said. I'm going out to buy a chametz dik. Pesach dik I have already. Now I have to go buy a chametz dik one. The point being that Hagala was once a very central, integral part. It was synonymous with preparations for Pesach, whereas today it seems like it's a bit more of a footnote, or maybe maybe we still kasher. We kasher the counters and the sink, we pour hot water and everything, and then we cover it, which itself is sort of indicating that you're not fully relying on the kashering. We're not getting into the history and the details of that particular minhag or whatever you want to call it. But just to mention that Hagala, for example, was a much bigger deal, and you open Minhagim Ariel as well, and it's Torah Shulchan Aruch already has a very formal feeling to it, and the Seder is the Seder. So if I write a Sefer on Shulchan Aruch today, and I also write chapters on Hagala, doesn't mean that Hagala is as important and central to me as it was back then. But Maharil, in his Hilchos Pesach as well, has a lot to say on Hagala. Hagala was clearly seen as a tchum of Pesach. So that's one example. Like I was saying, we need to really put ourselves in to get the full picture. Part of that, I would say, if I can digress just a bit more, I think part of that is by, for example, taking the Sefer Minhagim Ariel and actually opening it to the beginning of Hilchos Pesach and reading it straight and being attuned, paying attention to what he does mention, what he doesn't mention, how he mentions it, because it is a lot more descriptive. It is a lot more directly in reference to the lived experience, the lived halachic practice of the people at the time, as opposed to, like I said, Sefer like Shulchan Aruch can have layers and layers going back to Mishnayos, Gemara. Here, the Maharil was giving drashas. He was focusing exclusively on what was relevant to his time and place. So in getting back to the history of mechira, so I noticed that in his drashas he mentions you have kalim that you can't really clean for Pesach. They're too encrusted with chametz, or they've absorbed chametz. So the Maharil says that you should give the kalim, you should give them to a non-Jew. It doesn't mention anything about selling, which itself perhaps is somewhat notable. He mentions you should give it, and he emphasizes, and he's not the first. If you look in Torah Shulchan Aruch, there's other sources in that space saying something similar, but he was mentioning it in his drasha that it cannot be a matana al manas lahachzir, because surely if you're giving it, you sort of do kind of want it back after Pesach, but it can't be stated explicitly. It can't be the methods, the oifen hakinyan can't be matana al manas lahachzir, even though matana al manas lahachzir is a totally legitimate halachic category of kinyan. So he has this lashon there that comes to chametz. There's an issue of harama. There's a bit of a chashash. Maybe people won't do it at all. So whatever, without getting into without turning it into a technical halachic issue, but as a historical point, that was the practical point he was making to his audience, that you have to give a matana, and it can't be a matana manas lahachzer. And then he adds, and if einay maminay, but what if you don't trust them? So then you can use tit, you can cover it in tit, and that's mevatel the chametz. He gives you an alternative eitz if you want to keep it in your house and not go through this procedure. So if not for that phrase, it wouldn't even be 100% clear what he meant by matana. Maybe you would think maybe he means to actually give it away and then say goodbye. But you say einay maminay, you don't trust him. Clearly, he's implying that even without calling it matana al manas lahachzir, you were expecting to get it back, but it just couldn't be stated outright, or at least it couldn't be part of the kinyan. But you were dealing with your neighbors, people that you knew. Obviously, the Jewish lived experience in different times, different places, as to whether you have a neighbor who fully knows your calendar and your ways, and the halachos you follow can vary tremendously from time to time, place to place, even today. I'm sure many different people do not really have a non-Jewish neighbor or friend, but some do.
Can I just ask one question? The kalim that the Maharil is talking about over here, that you can't get rid of the chametz on them, what is the chiyuv to get rid of the chametz on them? Meaning, it's not, presumably there's no glus kuyof over there, so it doesn't fit into the standard that the chacham didn't rely on bittul. So why do you have to get rid of it?
Right, so you'd have to dig into that separately, whether to see whether that's actually a pidin de Gemara, or that itself is sort of additional strictures, chumras, that were followed in Ashkenaz. We discussed before the minhag of cleaning the house. Ultimately goes back about 900 years. The earliest makar we have for Pesach cleaning, as distinct from bedikas chametz. As we've discussed, and I'll say it, B'kitzur b'dikas chametz, the category of b'dikas chametz seemingly is to look for specific, identifiable large pieces of chametz, as opposed to invisible chametz. So
that's exactly what I was getting at, because this Maharil, where he's talking about mechira, gifting it, but the point is, he's not talking about something that there's a chiyuv to get rid of. He's talking about something that's b'toras chumra, in the vein of Pesach cleaning, that you don't want to own a keli that has shmutz that you can't get off, but not something that there's an actual chiyuv to be mevayir.
So you'd have to check to see in that same paragraph, though, he also mentions b'chlal that there are people that have actual chametz, they have beer, or they have lekach. Those are the two examples he gives: beer and lekach. Lekach is an old Yiddish word that goes back to the Maharil and beyond. So the paragraph begins by mentioning these kalim. That was just the topic he was coming off from, and he mentions the matana in that context. So then he moves on to mention actual chametz as well, and he reiterates, when you give that to the guy as well, to the non-Jew, then you should also not give it as a matana manas lahachzir, but as a matana gemura. Just to round off that previous thought, since I started mentioning the distinction, b'dikas chametz is a smaller project. As the Mishnah says, it takes place the night before. It shouldn't take that long to search a house, especially depending on how big or small your house was. It shouldn't take that long to look for actual cookies, large pieces of chametz. But there's a separate category of cleaning the house, cleaning for chametz, and that refers more to the assumption that there's chametz splattered on the wall or splattered on kalim. The Mishnah also alludes somewhere to, I didn't review the mechiras in detail this year yet, but the Mishnah itself refers to an areva. You can use dough to, you can even use dough to fill a hole, and you assume that the dough is no longer edible. So it doesn't seem like the Mishnah and the Gemara were treating chametz like quite the radioactive material that we treat it as today. That's something that's developed over time, but treating it that way does go back at least 900 years, and we see that already. I think the Rav Yah mentions this idea of scrubbing the walls, scrubbing the chairs. So whether or not that's an actual halachic requirement, I'll be doing the Gemara, but that was how it was. That's certainly how the practice has been to treat it like chametz. And like I mentioned before, kashing your counters and all these other practices that we do. Not all of them would necessarily be required by Din de Gemara or even mentioned in Din de Gemara, but that's how it's come to be practiced. So that's to your question about the kalim. But like as I mentioned, it's not just the kalim. He also mentions giving what seems like pretty chametz gomer to a non-Jew as well. So this is a particular source that I came across this week. And this is not. He doesn't mention mechira at all. And in fact, this era, his generation, is the first time that we actually do hear about mechira. His contemporary, the Tumas Hadashan, I believe, is usually pointed at as the first one to mention something similar about you have this chametz, maybe you have beer in a quantity that you can't get rid of before Pesach, and I believe the Tumas Hadashan is pointed to as mentioning the possibility of selling it, but by selling it, they meant to actually hand it over and deliver it and deposit it in the non-Jew's house. And now it's just a question of mechira or matana. If you're already dropping it off, then I guess depending on how much trust or whatever the factors are. So the Maharil seems to be assuming that matana would be fine, as I mentioned. Mechira doesn't indicate whether he had an issue with it or just wasn't something that had occurred to people yet. There is the one earlier makar, is the Tosefta. There's a Tosefta that says that maybe it says if you're on a ship and you're trapped and you have some chametz, you can sell it or give it as a matana, and it could be returned after Pesach. So there is this Tosefta that
about returning it after Pesach.
I would have to check it again, but I think it says it or it's implied. That's the vart. Otherwise, what's the chiddush? The Mishnah and the Gemara also talk about selling something before this man, and what if you have your friend's chametz? Should you sell it? Should you not sell it? So obviously, if you're able to sell it on the market as a real sale, that's pshita. Maybe there are those that still want to argue about what the Tosefta means. I think the general consensus is that the Tosefta was referring to something like this. However, that's about it. I think in terms of early mechiras, maybe there's something as well from the time of the Goyim. I don't recall offhand, but otherwise it's this dar. It's the dar of the Maharil Tumas Hadashan, where you start seeing these mentions, this discussion of you have this extra stuff, and you want to get rid of it. Make sure you don't have it for Pesach, and you have a neighbor, a friend, who can be helpful with that. And so Tumas Hadashan is already mentioned mechira, but Maharil is still talking about matana and emphasizes that it cannot be matana masahachzer because of the issue of harama. So you're actually seeing this concern, from the earliest point. You're seeing this concern about harama. There's early mechiras. I think the Mitzvah to Goyis Maimonides as well about this point. So I don't know if the Goyis Maimonides quite presents it as in detail or indicating what people were actually doing. Maharil, like I mentioned, Maharil is written in a more plain-spoken, practical way. That's the makar I ran into. So that's the first. That's really the earliest step. So the way it's usually for those who trace it, the next major step along the way, I believe, is the Bach on the Torah and these halachas of Hilchos Pesach. And we also know historically that once the center of Jewish life, you could say, shifted from Ashkenaz, the Germanic lands, to Poland, the lands in Eastern Europe. We know that the history of Jews in Eastern Europe for many hundreds of years was very strongly tied to the alcohol trade. More generally, historically, it's interesting to point out, it comes up in different contexts. It's important to know that hard liquor was only invented somewhere around that time. The process of distillation, until then, there was only natural fermentation. So wine or beer or other natural process of fermentation, but the most alcohol you can get out of that is, 13, 15%, whatever the exact ceiling is. But this process of distillation allowed for much higher percentages, much higher alcohol content. And one of the early names for alcohol was actually aquavita, mayim chayim. And I think you see that name in some svarim. Some of the early svarim that referred to hard alcohol might refer to it as aquavita. But it took time. Sorry?
Just one point to clarify that, you could confirm, but I'm fairly certain that the process of being able to make what we call hard liquor from potato or other non-chametz thing came much later.
So that's a different discussion. I want to give a share on that. Potato specifically is from around the time of the Tzemach Tzedek, Rabbi Akiva Eiger, the somewhat famous Isser that's attributed to Rabbi Akiva Eiger was actually specifically about potato. Potato was the new product on the market, and Rabbi Akiva Eiger specifically had an issue with potato. There were kosher lePesach hard alcohols before that. Tzemach Tzedek himself discusses using beets. I think maybe it's sugar beets, if I'm not mistaken. So that was the previous source. Even in Russia, you think of Russian vodka, you think of potatoes, but actually, apparently till the 1830s, standard vodka apparently was made from beets, and the potato as the source, as the basis for it, came later. And the big Isser or Kiveger was against the potato. That's another discussion, perhaps for another time. So there were many ways you could use wine. If you use wine as your basis, then that's brandy. If you there were many other
necessarily chametz, even from its inception, you're saying.
Yeah, sure. Not necessarily chametz. However, in Poland specifically, I saw someone mention recently that Poland, this area, is sort of the breadbasket of Europe. So there was a lot of grain, a lot of surplus grain, and once this product had fully come into its own as something people wanted and desired and consumed and paid for and traded in, so there was a lot of grain in Poland that was to be used for distillation, and that, of course, would be chametz stick, and the Jews in Poland were. I don't know, maybe people have written statistics of what percentage of the Jewish population at any given point was involved in it, so I don't have the numbers offhand, but clearly there was a very notable link between the Jewish community and this line of work, this line of business. As I believe, Glenn Diner has written a book about how even through the 1800s, even past when you imagine the stories of the Arenda and the Pritzim, but even through the 1800s, maybe even a bit through the early 1900s, there was still, even as it shifted to factories, Jews were very tied to this industry.
We all know it's a sequel of Machanaim books.
Right. So again, the question is what percentage of Jews and what other industries Jews were involved in, but certainly for certain times, certain places, this was strongly associated with Jews. And so the Bach is living in Poland. He's living, I didn't go check the exact dates, but either mid to late 1500s, I would think, or maybe early 1600s. So at this point, there are Jews that have large quantities of Pesach of chametz alcohol on their hands, and it's not something they can easily liquidate and get rid of. And that's when mechiras chametz, in the form that we know it, starts really taking off in earnest. And specifically, the issue at this point was that it didn't seem practical anymore to remove it from your home and deliver it to the other fellow's home. It was just too much and not practical. And that's when mechiras chametz starts getting more technical and more complicated. Bear in mind that throughout this time, mechiras chametz was still an individual thing. You personally had to track down a non-Jewish acquaintance before Pesach and do the sale directly with him. That, in a sense, you might say, is a bit more of an authentic, whether or not, what exactly the non-Jewish person is thinking while he's doing it is a question, but at least you're actually going through the exact effort you would go through if you actually just wanted to sell something to someone. The question, though, being, what about it being in your property? So then you have these discussions about how you have to put it in a special room, and maybe you have to sell the room or remasker the room, and you have to have a key and give him the key and bring him to your house and show him what it is. There are a lot of details that were emphasized at the time as being important. As time went on, questions started being raised about what the exact halachic gather of the mechira is, because we start getting into the technicalities of kinyanim. It's not clear which kinyan, if you actually hand it over, so then it doesn't seem like the kinyan is too questionable. But if it's still in your house, then the question is, by which means is the kinyan actually being effectuated? So that gets complicated and technical. And these questions were taking off in the 1600s and the 1700s. Within Chabad, obviously, the Alter Rebbe's Seder Mechiras Chametz is a pretty famous, notable thing, still very high in people's radar. But the details and the background, the context, isn't necessarily as well known, as famous. The one thing everyone knows is the Art of Kabbalah, but what the Art of Kabbalah was supposed to be doing and what the context was and what was bothering people at that time is perhaps a bit less known. But what we find is that mechiras chametz, up until perhaps you could say 100 years ago, mechiras chametz, from the time the Terumas Hadeshen mentioned it until about 100, 150 years ago, was constantly in flux, constantly evolving in reaction to different issues, practical issues of trying to get it done. We know that, I believe I spoke about it once as well, we know that the minig of making a more central mechira through one central individual took off somewhere in the late years of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe has a tshuva already alluding to a town that had some kind of practice like this, although it still wasn't the same as it is today. So the Alter Rebbe, that tshuva might be the earliest source of any kind about this. And then, as time went on, it gradually moved to the direction that we are all familiar with today, where you trek over to the Rav and you do a kinyan with the Rav. Originally, you were selling it to the Rav. Today, it's generally not selling it to the Rav, but appointing the Rav as your representative to sell it. There's as I think I'm indicating and suggesting, there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of practical issues and concerns, some halachic issues and concerns, and that's sort of what brought us to where we are today. But there certainly are parts of it, elements of it, that we could potentially question and scrutinize, and I think there's room to ask whether, if we were starting from scratch, if we were trying to solve, if we woke up today and we were trying to solve how to get chametz on your property, out of your property, out of your rishos, your bailos for Pesach, if we had to start from scratch, whether this is precisely what we would do and how we would go about it, or whether we would do things somewhat differently. At this point, it does seem like a lot of the pieces are just sort of frozen in place, because this is how we've been doing it for the longest time. But often we do things because this is how they've always been done. But interestingly, this is not how it's always been done. It's always been done this way since we froze it in the way it was done, whatever it was, 100.
Even once it started being done by everyone and through a central mechira through the Rav, it was constantly being updated to cater for whatever the local legal issues were or other practical issues, which I assume you're going to get to.
Well, I guess we'll see what we get to. For example, one interesting thing relating to the Alter Rebbe is that alongside Art of Kabbalah, one other detail that he emphasized, and maybe we'll get a little bit into what Art of Kabbalah is, what it's meant to be, but another thing he emphasized was the use of legal paper. I don't remember the exact term right now offhand, but there is a specific term for it. But essentially, 250 years ago, governments, or at least I guess the Russian government and other governments did not keep a central database of deeds, of legal documents concerning who owns what and which transactions had transpired. Instead, many governments would issue a product which we're just, again, I don't remember the exact term, we're just going to call it legal paper. They issued a product, a form, something that we're calling legal paper, and that the idea was where you have to buy it, you have to pay to obtain the legal paper. So if you wrote it on your own piece of paper at home, it wouldn't be officially recognized. Whereas if you wrote it on this official form, this official legal paper, it's essentially a piece of stationery. It had some markings, some stampings on it that indicated that it was legal. Maybe it had a number, a code on it. I don't know. But you had to pay for it. You had to obtain the paper, which amounted essentially to a tax. It was a government tax on every transaction because you needed to buy government paper to conduct the transaction. If you dig deep into the history of the American Revolution, you'll find that one of the grievances that the revolutionaries had was that they were forced to buy the British legal paper. That was another tax that they were very aggrieved by at the time. So the Russian government had such paper. When I was looking into it, I think maybe it was last year, the Alter Rebbe uses a Russian term. People that, if you read through the mechiras chametz, if you even do that, and you see the term, may not be fully clear. I think Rabbi Levin in his new edition, I think he explains fairly clearly or generally what it is. But if you actually transliterate, if you figure out how to write those Russian words in Russian and you search it, you can actually find probably a Russian Wikipedia article about it or pictures of what this paper looked like at the time. The paper is dated, so you can find legal paper from Russia from 1809, let's say. So the Alter Rebbe actually wrote that the mechiras chametz should be written on legal paper. And we find around the same time that the Chassam Sofer, I believe also, maybe somewhat later, but the Chassam Sofer and Alter Rebbe at least overlapped somewhat. Chassam Sofer also has this tshuva discussing this concern. This concern had arisen. Maybe also the Baruch Tam, if I'm not mistaken, was involved in this discussion. This discussion arose where there was this concern that the mechiras chametz would not be legally binding. You're doing a transaction with a non-Jew. The non-Jew doesn't really abide by Jewish law. So any normal, reasonable transaction he'd participate in would likely be a legal transaction. So the question became, if these are not legally recognized, so then what are we doing? Is this even legitimate? Or does this seem like a farce? I want to make a more general point, which is that there is always this specter of harama casting its shadow over mechiras chametz. You see a lot of discussions. There's a famous achrin in the maybe early 1700s that essentially came out and said that mechiras chametz is a form of harama, but harama is fine if it's midrabanan. If it's an issue that's midrabanan, then that's a whole stance that many have either agreed with or disagreed with. Part of the issue, the way I see it, is that having looked into this somewhat, is that you'll be surprised how poor the definitions are for some of the basic concepts that are involved here. So, for example, what is the definition of harama? I don't think there is a very good, clear definition of harama. It is very likely, in my opinion, that if you actually zoom out and actually are just approaching it, fully objectively to the extent that you think you can, and you evaluate every achron said on the topic relating to harama, I think you might find that every single achron is working with a slightly different conception of what harama is. These are very very nebulously defined concepts. Obviously, if you go outside and take a survey on the street and you ask non-Jews whether they think mechiras chametz is the real deal or perhaps not so much, I think most people's instinct will be that it's not so much, which itself could then be a vicious cycle. If even if you think it's not, but the person you're dealing with thinks it is, and maybe we don't want to do interviews with the people that are the stand. Usually, every Rav has their standard fellow that they haul in every year. So I don't know how many interviews have been conducted with them, or whether we want to do that. But if we were to ask them, perhaps we might be afraid to hear their answer as to what exactly they think they're doing and how legitimate they think it is. And then the question is that a problem? Where do we draw the line? There is no clear line as far as I understand from having looked into it. Having looked into it once or twice, if I really wanted to draw my own opinion about it, I essentially realized that I would have to zoom out and read everything that anyone has ever written about Harama in any context ever, because that is how poorly defined the concept is.
Because it's a very broad topic. Can I just clarify one thing? The issue of the mechira being legally binding, was that specifically because it was a guy? Were Poskim concerned about using this paper for Tnoim and Ksubas and other shtaris that were between Yidden?
Well, I think if it's among Yidden and it's done kadas v'kadin, so then and it's enforceable and based in, that should be fine. That should be enough. The issue here specifically was dealing with an outsider who, as I said, already might not be taking the matter so seriously. So the fact that it's not a true legally binding transaction seems to compound things and make things seem that much less legitimate. So we do find that the Baruch Tam, the Chavetz Chaim, the Chassam Sofer, we're having this discussion. I think maybe the Chassam Sofer also expressed that it should be conducted to the best of one's ability according to legal strictures. Yeah. So the Alter Rebbe, that really is the context for the Art of Kabbalah as well. The Alter Rebbe is addressing this. This was an issue that was bothering people at the time. Like we said, all the aspects of the Mechir were evolving, both in terms of, like we said, whether it's in your house or if it is in your house, what steps are you doing to convey that it's not under your bias for the duration? Are you selling it directly, or is there a representative? All of these things were in flux at this time, and so this issue was also an issue that received particular prominence at this time. So the Alter Rebbe was saying essentially that he added this new requirement: you should get this legal paper and make sure that it. And I think he writes clearly that it should be acceptable lefi chukei hakira, according to the laws of the Caesar, of the Tsar of Russia. The Art of Kabbalah was a part of that. The Art of Kabbalah was also the issue being that I haven't looked it up again, but I believe the general gist of it is that this non-Jew can't even necessarily afford to pay all this money. So that's also the term that's used is where's the smichus das? To what extent is this guy fully committed in his mind that this is legitimate? So the idea was, in Art of Kabbalah, is you bring in it's like a legitimate part of a transaction. If someone can't put up all the money themselves, so you want to have financial backup. Someone so you get someone who's Jewish. They're not legally the Bailam of the Chametz for the duration of Pesach. That's not an issue. But so you get a Yid who is a man of means who can put up the money because collateral was a backup, and that way the non-Jew feels more confident that he could actually pull this off if he needed to. That was the.
I don't know that it's necessarily mysterious to what you're saying, but the way I recall the issue of the Art of Kabbalah was that it was coming to address a specific problem vis-a-vis the Kinyan Kesef. But but even if you don't have the Art of Kabbalah, the other Kinyanim that you do, are valid even without the Arif Kablan, and it was just that, hey, for whatever reason, because the mechiras chametz is so delicate and borderlining harama, we want to make sure we have extra kinyanim just to make sure everything, sort of all your bases are covered. So we want to make sure you also have a kinyan kesef, and that was the issue, that the kinyan kesef with a guy doesn't work unless you have the Arif Kablan.
So I would have to take a look at it again. My big disclaimer for this whole discussion is I'm going off of general impressions from having looked into it in previous years. So this is not meant to be 100% precise, but I do think the general gist of everything we've said so far is accurate overall. You would have to go back and take a look at that. The Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek's, but the way I remember it is that there was this specific question, concern about the essentially the entire mechira and the smichos das of the non-Jew. So what we find is this is sort of buried in Chabad sources. It's printed in Yad Torah. It's printed now in the new edition of the Tzemach Tzedek and Orach Chaim. But there actually was a Chabad Rav or Chabad Matz, someone who was Isaac in Yonei Halacha, who was affiliated with the Chabad movement at the time of Tzemach Tzedek, who actually was, I don't remember what the exact question that triggered it, but there was some kind of complex issue in the mechiras chametz that he was concerned about, and he was looking into it and writing it up and sharing it with Tzemach Tzedek, and he raised the issue that apparently it doesn't look like, the use of legal paper or not, whatever the precise technical issue was, he basically realized that this is not, it will not be recognized in a legal setting. That was the concern he raised, and he shared with Tzemach Tzedek, and our tshuvos of Tzemach Tzedek on mechiras chametz, and in the middle of one of these tshuvos, Tzemach Tzedek apparently says something to the effect of that the takana of the Arif Kablan and the Alter Rebbe is so wonderful and so powerful that it even addresses this concern as well. So even if it's not legally binding, legally enforceable, but however, the financial backing of the Arif Kaplan is so powerful that it gives the guy the proper smichos das. Pretty clear, pretty sure that's how it is articulated. So that can perhaps raise some questions about the state of things today. I think there was someone by the name of I'm briefly forgetting his name, but there was a fellow who was Niskarf to Chabad in the 60s or 70s, who actually once wrote a ha'ara. Maybe it was in the Kibbutz Yad Torah. They also used to print some ha'aras from people. It was Rabbi Faxbrenner. Interesting fellow, interesting character. Passed away a few years ago. So Rabbi Faxbrenner was mu'erer that the Arif Kablan, as it's practiced today, doesn't really. It seems like a shadow of its former self. For checking the box, we put someone's name down as an Arif Kablan, but the Arif Kablan is a chassidish younger man who doesn't have any financial. He's not being chosen for his financial wherewithal and assets. People try to answer. I do think that we've perhaps gotten a little stuck. Often the discourse, having grown up, having heard shiurim, often the discourse we hear around the topic is like a mimer, lahavin inyan, or of kablan, lahavin inyan. The Alter Rebbe was talking as a takon and flow of kablan, and we're going to explain how it solves all the problems, how it's amazing, but it's coming from, I think, just the assumption that if the Alter Rebbe was talking it and we claim to do it, so then it must be perfect. But the Alter Rebbe could be talking it in a particular context with a particular kavanah, in a particular tzura, and just checking the box doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually being mekayim the idea. I think it's sort of taken as a more it's seen through a technical lens as a technicality, and that by checking this box, it magically solves all the problems, as opposed to approaching it more like you would approach any topic that you are genuinely trying to properly understand and get to the bottom of. So if I may offer that light bikoidus. So I've personally found that zooming out a bit and seeing the history, like I said, from the Tumas Hadash, the Maril, Bach, and the many other stops along the way, we could have perhaps a better, more natural understanding and appreciation of what these parts in the mechiras chametz are meant to be. And potentially, we shouldn't necessarily think that we're actually being mekayim it exactly the way the Alter Rebbe designed it and intended it. We're trying our best, or we're doing a version of it, but that doesn't mean that it's actually precisely, like I said, what the Alter Rebbe, how he designed it and how he intended it. There certainly is no clear marker that says, for example, that the art of Kabbalah could be just any random person. As far as the way I understand it, would be that if we sat down to re-examine the subject, we should also try our best to be mechazik it as much as we can to make it as closely as possible to resemble a legitimate transaction. I could just give random technical examples, but if you're pulling in a guy off the street, maybe he's the super of a building or whatever, wherever these people are found. But are these people that are generally signing big multi-million-dollar deals? Is this something that looks plausible from its various parts? I think if we were trying to design it, I think we would try to design it to make it as in following the modes of commerce and transaction as they are today. If we were actually trying to channel the Alter Rebbe's previous hakavana, as it were, then maybe there would be many, multiple things that we would be doing differently to try to bring it as closely in line with what a legitimate transaction looks like. Perhaps find a non-Jew who's a bit more in the tchum of deals, and perhaps get an Arv Kabbalah who is also someone who is involved in deals of this nature. Things that just seem a bit more, not much more. I remember, it occurs to me right now, gave a shir another year on a somewhat different topic, but the stay chametz, I think, or perhaps no, it was a controversy between Tikuchinsky and Chaim Noah over the kvius when Shvi Shel Pesach falls out on Friday, and so Achron for us is Shabbos, but in Eretz Yisrael it's Isra Chag, and whether you could have chametz, you can have chametz. So I think a story was invoked there, where they actually sold the chametz to the parrots. So that's an interesting example. I'm just citing it for that reason, that they actually sold the chametz to the parrots. And the story went that the parrots decided to play a prank, and he said what did he say? He said he's not selling it back, or whatever it was that he said. He said something that seemed to invalidate the mechira.
Published in that new volume of Kovetz Haaretz Lamaisa or something from
Right. So I have to go back and see exactly what the exact story was. I don't want to get it wrong, but it seems like at least some of the time the natural candidate to sell to him may have been the parrots himself. So there's just this distinction between looking at it as a living, breathing thing, which mechiras chametz seems to have been a living, breathing organism up until a certain point, versus just this dinosaur of we're going through the motions, we're going through the steps, and everything in the background changed. Everything about the life and reality of how we do things changed, but we're still following the instructions as they were last written, as they were last recorded. I think I saw maybe I don't want to generalize too much. I think there are some. I think maybe I read somewhere that maybe one of the mechiras in Eretz Yisrael, I don't remember which one, if it's Rabbanut or the Charedus or one of the major mechiras, they still do add clauses that say different things. Maybe they do add a clause that says that, at least it says something to the effect of, this non-Jew is agreeing to abide by, based in, you have a musik today of arbitration. You're accepting the arbitration of another entity, so maybe they put in a line that this non-Jew agrees to conduct all arbitration in front of a beis din. There's at least some attempt to update things, to react to the reality of Messias. You have a certain objective in mind that you're trying to reach, you're trying to achieve, and you're adapting in response to that, in the face of that.
Be interesting to see if there's been any attempt from like somebody who's like a lawyer or somebody who's familiar with American law or secular law of any given country, to create a shtar mechiras chametz that addresses that's actually would be legally binding and enforceable in a secular court of law.
Right. So one of the things I looked up was to see whether anyone's written on this from a modern legal perspective, and I did find that maybe he was a student. Someone wrote a paper for some law publication. Someone from background wrote something on this, and that was the premise. The premise was we see some mechiras that mention that it should be legally binding. Would it actually be legally binding? He said he went and looked. He checked. It's never come up. The question has never been tested in American court. I guess there's never been really any excessive legal, or even halachic complication that's arisen that anybody can point to that anyone remembers. However, based on his analysis, at least his analysis was that it would not be enforceable in American courts for more than one reason. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't evaluate whether his claims are correct. But the one guy who actually took the topic and wrote something on it, that was their conclusion, that it would not be recognized as such.
One thing that comes to mind as also just sort of pulling from memory from previous years, that in many of the other kreisen where people talk about this question, it often comes back to taking the approach, which you referenced earlier, that be'emes, all you need is a gilui das, and b'meila haram is good enough, and it doesn't, so b'meila, even though there's all the quote-unquote holes to the system, it doesn't really matter. But l'didan, that you see the Alter Rebbe to make sure that it should be a proper mechira without harama, so then all of these heterim and workarounds that other rabbonim and batidin might rely on, we have to re-examine if that is quote-unquote acceptable according to the Alter Rebbe and those Gedolei Yisrael, some Sefer, and others who went in the same kav.
Right. That's certainly part of the context. There is that I think the Alter Rebbe is rejecting that stance that it's a form of harama, and the Alter Rebbe was not happy with that. I actually saw with regard to the Maharil, I was looking to see who discusses this Maharil about the Matan Manas La'achzer, or this. It's not just the Maharil, but I said it's quoted in Torah from Agaris Mamonius. So I saw that the Alter Rebbe's brother, the She'eres Yehuda, actually has a tshuva in which he mentions a shmua b'shem his brother, the Alter Rebbe. It's also included in the collections of the shmuas b'shem his brother, where he says that even though these mechiras, Maril or others, they say that if you do Matan Manas La'achzer, it looks like harama. My brother said that no, you're pashut even by your matzah. I don't remember. He says I don't remember exactly what his reason was. Which is interesting. But you see, the Alter Rebbe essentially was a machmer. The Alter Rebbe is coming from a place of no games, no shortcuts. Has to be done 100% properly above board, and if we have to rewrite it and restructure it, we don't have to rewrite and restructure as much as we need to. And that part of it doesn't seem to have necessarily been fully preserved in terms of following in the Alter Rebbe's path and footsteps. I've said, I don't remember the exact proposal that I've offered, but even that in terms of legal, not in legal terms, but even just in terms of, sometimes I'm sensitive to the fact that some of the stuff we're doing is happening in the background to such an extent that the person who shows up at the Rav's place and signs a thing, do they even really fully feel the experience that they sold something, that they made a mechira? Does it have that emotional feeling of you being mecher something, or all parties at this point are sort of going through the motions in some sense? I've suggested that maybe the mechira should be broadcast live, and just within today's terms. First of all, you sold it directly. So the fact that you have someone doing it in your stead might be a matter of practicality, but it certainly seems to weaken the Alter Rebbe wrote his takana, by the way. It wasn't for the Rav. It was Alter Rebbe still wrote it and designed it for you to do it yourself. So that's not part of Alter Rebbe's
stuff to his property.
Sorry?
And in the Alter Rebbe's times, they were still actually transferring the chametz to the home or the property of the guy?
No, that already, since the Bach, that already long been, but there was about all the terms that they mentioned. You have to give him the key, you have to show it to him, all these Tanaim that used to be, and I think the Alter Rebbe still mentions those as well. It's another other stuff that's fallen by the wayside. So, what was the what was I middle of which point was I trying to say?
You're saying about making it feel like you actually closed on a deal today.
Right. So even just in terms of that, the smichas das of the mechiras, smichas das of the mechiras is eichazach. No. Again, I don't know if there are clear, hard definitions, but if the spirit of it seems to be that you should be mechazaget kol minei chizukim. So I can think of many ways to be mechazaget. Some of them more technical, some of them less technical, but why does no one even know the guy's name, right? Who did you sell your chametz to? Oh, I don't know. He did it for me. How many transactions? Sometimes you still, if you're a rich guy and you want to sell something and you tell your one of your assistants to sell it to you and you don't care who they sell it to, as long as they bring the money back. But here you're selling it to someone and you sort of do semi-expect to get it back, and why not? Why should you not know who the guy is? Just basic. There's no marker that says that there's no Indian to know, or that no one ever said it that way. It just evolved that way. It came to this state of affairs. But that's just my personal general sense. It's not. I'm not going to write a kuntras and prove each point with 10 rayas. But if you see things through generally the same lens, I think what I'm saying is clear and makes sense, or could make sense. Any other? Let's draw down. Let's conclude our conversation. Are any other points relating to this that we wanted to mention, that we wanted to cover, or any other points, questions?
I don't think so. I guess one thing that comes to my mind, which may or may not already pertain to the question of how legally binding it is what you're selling. Once upon a time, what were the things that they could preserve? So you had alcohol, and you mentioned lekach, which I assume to me, lekach means sponge cake, but I imagine in those days lekach meant something more like something hard, like a cookie or a cracker, because sponge cake, certainly with the absence of preservatives, is not going to last you a week.
Right.
But
well, I mean,
nowadays that we have sort of food that has such a long shelf life, are you including in your sale a packet of crackers with half a cracker left in it? Is that something that even has a value that can pertain to that the shtar could even pertain to? Like, how could you sell something that doesn't have any quantifiable value?
I mean, just as a counterpoint, I'm forgetting the terms, but there are people that store stuff in lockers and then they don't pay the bill, and then the folks that own the lockers or whatever else it is, they might sell it off. They might sell it as a closed box, a closed room, a closed. You don't know what you're getting, but it might be oitzvis, it might be garnished. Maybe there's some kind of show that's based on that premise. I don't remember literally can't remember any of the names or details right now. So it's not unheard of to. You want to frame it like that. You're buying 70, or 700 or 7,000 mystery boxes. Some of them might have $1,000 whiskey, and some of them might have half a pack of crackers. I don't know. Maybe there's it's not completely upgefrekt to look at it that way. I don't know why. Technically, I don't see why every individual, even if you go 100% whole by the mechir, there's some people that you go to other communities. There is a bit of this vibe of the mechir isn't 100% legit, like you alluded to, maybe because they think it is a shtickle harama. So there certainly are people that are makbid. Just if it's just your individual, you don't have the large stock of anything. Why not just get everything out of your house and burn your bread? You see in the drawings of Bir Chametz, some other communities, they throw the bread and the cereal and other stuff in the fire. But in Chabad, we're very proud of the Alter Rebbe's mechira, and it's on Harama. It's amazing. It's Chabadik. So I don't know if it's stated explicitly or anyone ever says so explicitly, but it's almost implied like you should dafka be mishtatef in the mechira, even if you just have. But I don't think there's a clear marker for that. If I'm wrong, if I'm mistaken, I guess I'll be corrected. but I don't believe there's a clear marker that says that there's a person Indian to be mishtatev for mechira b'dafka. So
Ironically, Dafka and other Kreisen, I can't say details, but it's common, at least in certain Kreisen where they're looking to, Lakewood, certainly places like that, you hear, you go to the Rav, and there's a lot of questions on the form. You need to give an approximate value of how much and write some more details of what you're selling. And I don't remember more examples, but I do remember coming across on people's, on social media, different questions or details that they were expected to answer the Rav or to even write into the star. Whereas in my experience in Lubavitch, it's not like that at all. It's a very, very standard form. You write your address, Kula Havula, he asks you for a phone number or a place to access the keys, and that's about it.
right, because somehow the art of Koblin solves everything. I don't fully understand where that comes from. I'm not giving a specific. I think it should really be down to every Rav to be boichen the sugya alibud MS and reach their own conclusions. But it doesn't seem like that's fully happening either. It just seems like there's a certain degree of inertia of we're following the Alter Rebbe, so everything's good. But Alter Rebbe didn't address these particular issues at all of how you want to iron out these particular details. What did I want to add to that? I wanted to say, by the way, Mariel mentioned Matana, right? So if you actually have a neighbor and you think they might actually appreciate, or even if not, even if they'll return it to you, but there is no hachrek to actually, mechir is only once things get really complicated and you don't trust them, but if it's just a few loaves of bread and crackers, and even if they completely betray you and they don't give it back, it's not the end of the world, and you don't have to do mechir at all. You can do a matana. I was imagining you have an apartment building where you have a super. Maybe you could, all the people in the building could take their chametz and put it in a closet and tell them that it's a matana. And you don't have to go to the Rav. You don't have to do any of those things. I think part of why everyone does a mechir is because there's this general sense that maybe you own some chametz that you were completely unaware of. There's a whole loaf of bread under the floorboards. So, that's not going to be part of the matana. Okay. I'm not
getting into question.
It's not halachic advice, meret and inyam. I'm just trying to open the discussion to think about it in more concrete, everyday ways and to challenge some assumptions. Ultimately, I think we know that you and I both plan to do the regular mechiras chametz. That's not the purpose of our conversation. I think it's instructive to at least think about it. Always, like I said, if you had all this information and you were figuring out what the best chametz removal strategy for you this year is, how would you go about it? I think the answer would be a bit different than just doing the thing that everyone does every year, because that's the thing we do.
I think it kind of came, just as you said, this thing about you said in jest about the floorboards, but I think that's taka the reality. And if you want to trace it, sort of, mechiras chametz en masse started, like you said, when people had businesses of liquor. But still, individuals weren't selling their chametz. In their house, they got rid of all the chametz. It must have given in krom, the mashka in the store, in the inn, and the thing in the kreshma, that they sold. And then eventually it extended even to every individual selling their personal chametz. And then the way it's manifest today is that you have many people, again, in Lubavitch, it's not like this, because we do even sell chametz gomer, but in the Welt, it's considered, if you want to be machmer, then you're not going to sell chametz gomer. So then you have all the people who are coming to the Rav, that they're getting rid of all the chametz, but they're coming to the Rav to sell something that they don't even know exists, but just in case it exists. So Weiter makes it a little bit of a, what are you doing? How could you sell something that you don't even know if and what it is?
Right. Well, like I said, in this day and age, my counterpoint is in this day and age, you could sell mystery property and, tell
one. If there's anything, you're saying if there's something under the floorboard, so that, okay, so it's in that sense, the way we do it in Chabad, that we include in it chametz that for sure is in your pantry, and then but anything else that's hiding somewhere is included. So at least there's something tangible that the mechira is effectuating.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. All right. It was a pleasure chatting with you. Hopefully we can do many more of these in the future, Be'ezus Hashem. Yeah. And wishing everybody, hopefully we'll do a few more Pesach ones as well, but in the meantime, wishing everybody taka kosher and Freilich and Pesach, and be successful in ridding yourself of all the chametz, both physical and spiritual.